Welcome to the Untangling Web3 podcast. Bitcoin mining is often painted as an environmental problem, but what if it could be one of the cleanest technologies we have? In the right conditions, mining can drive renewable adoption, stabilize power grids, and even generate huge economic value. That's exactly what today's guest is working to prove. We're joined by Dr. Owen Vaughan, founder and CEO of Bitroots, a platform that connects buyers directly with Bitcoin mined from certified renewable sources. A former chief science officer, Owen has authored 18 peer-reviewed papers, co-invented 30 patents, and built a career at the intersection of blockchain, cryptography, and sustainability. Today, we'll unpack how clean Bitcoin works with real-world use cases and what it takes to certify and scale renewable mining. Owen, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alec. Jack, I'm very pleased to be here.
It's great to have you on the show. I'm excited. We've been trying to line this up for a while. Mm-hmm. Finally, we're in the studio. It's looking fresh. Jack's here, I'm here, and we're talking about one of our favorite topics, which is Bitcoin mining, obviously. Mm-hmm. Shall we take it nice and slow and go straight into what exactly is Bitcoin mining? Why do we need it? What value does it provide? And then we'll go into why does it use so much energy?
Mm-hmm. So Bitcoin mining is a process by which new transactions are secured onto the ledger in blocks and new coins are produced at the same time. So it's called mining. I mean, in the white paper, it used the term mining because it's analogous to gold mining in the sense that you expend some energy and you're rewarded with some new coins. The energy in this case is electricity to perform a computation, which is done by every node or miner on the network. And when a solution is found that's verified by every other node, the new transactions are confirmed and the miner is rewarded with some new coins.
Okay, got you. And then I guess the next point is, why does it use so much energy? Why is it so energy intensive to do Bitcoin mining?
Well, it uses a lot of energy because it's so popular. So the process itself, in the beginning when Bitcoin was deployed in 2009, you could just do this on your home laptop. Funnily enough, the algorithm to do it is called a hashing algorithm. And this exists on every computer in the world. So anyone could do it. But because of the popularity of Bitcoin, because everyone wants these new coins, it's now a huge industry, global industry. Every country in the world, there's a Bitcoin mining industry there. $16 billion per year of new Bitcoin are produced in this process. And I think it's always worth remembering, cryptocurrency is a big industry, but it's really dominated by Bitcoin. It was the original. Yeah. It is now 65% market cap of all the others combined. I think the next one's Ethereum on around 10% or something like that. So sometimes I think it's easy to ignore Bitcoin and get attracted by the bright lights of new and interesting blockchains. But it's the most popular and it's becoming more dominant each year.
I think one of the things I've seen is that right now in February, I take it here, it's using 0.12% of global electricity, which is it's a big number, right?
Yep.
And then you're kind of like questioning what is the value proposition for that amount of energy being used? Is that a question you often have to deal with being in the space?
Yes, I think so. I could sympathize maybe 10 years ago when the popularity of Bitcoin was growing exponentially. And the electricity use also it just looked like, what's the end of this? But the reality is it's an S-curve. So now it's tapered off. It's fairly stable at the moment. Yeah, it does use energy. I suppose the answer is it is a waste if you don't believe there's any value in Bitcoin. But I think the market has disproved that over the last 16 years. And to me, one of the biggest differentiators or the biggest value propositions for Bitcoin is financial inclusion. So one of the best tools for lifting nations out of poverty is access to financial markets. It used to be the stock market was reserved for the elites, that there's a huge barrier to entry. Now, here in the developed world, it's a bit easier. We have platforms to manage your investments, but it's still really difficult for many parts of the world. But getting access to Bitcoin is much easier. And if you look at the people who have benefited most from it, it's a real eclectic mix of world society. It's certainly not the traditional, barons getting already rich getting richer. So it's a very, very interesting technology. And I would, if you're questioning it, I would encourage you to be curious. Why is it so popular and becoming more so?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question that's obviously been around for a long time. The likes of, I think, Greenpeace have been campaigning against the use of proof of work and the way Bitcoin does things. I think maybe it's softened its stance a little bit now, but there was a time when it was definitely, really positioning for change in that regard. And I think you're right to point out it's kind of twofold. It's where's the energy coming from and why is it being used, and then what's the end goal, right? If it's a worthwhile goal, like financial inclusion, for example, then you can justify it. I want to kind of touch on the input side again, just for a moment, because I think it's worth us noting that. Do you think it's fair to say Bitcoin is kind of an outlier in the industry now, right? So not only is it the original, but it's also still the only one pretty much pushing proof of work, or of the major blockchains. It's the only one.
Doge is still there. What started as a meme coin is now like one of the major assets.
Doge actually is merged mining, so they leverage Litecoin. So they use Litecoin's mining. So that's another point. Is that while Bitcoin, I'd say it's now refined itself to these core features, the chief of which is proof of work. It links it to the real world in a way that no other cryptocurrency can say. There's mining operations that you can just see them, and it acts as a de-anonymization technique.
Can you break that down though? Why is that? Like a lot of maybe listeners won't know the difference between proof of work, how it's carried out, versus say proof of stake, which is now probably the most popular by number of networks adopting it. What is like on the ground? What does that actually mean for say a miner of proof of work in Bitcoin versus a validator in proof of stake on Ethereum?
Yeah, so at a very high level, if you were just to, take a Google Maps bird's eye view of the world, you would be able to zoom into some countries, for example, USA in Texas, and you'd be able to see these warehouses that have physical machines in them mining Bitcoin. And what that means is that someone took a huge amount of investment in the capital expenditure to create that, and ongoing operational expenditure, which actually much more. It's about 1% capex versus the rest opex. It means that if you're running this thing, you're a big business. A lot of them are listed companies now in the US, and you even have some nation states mining as well. And they are not going to do anything to disrupt the system they're in, because they've invested so much and they are kind of committed to ongoing investment. In a different type of blockchain, like proof of stake, it just relies on the electronic balance sheet of the major node operators. There's nothing physical there. If you were to look at, you take your Google Maps, you wouldn't know where these proof of stake, the main nodes that secure the network, where are they, who are they? It's all more ethereal and exists in cyberspace rather than the physical world.
Yeah, it's very tangible, right? Bitcoin in that sense, which is kind of strange because Bitcoin is like an intangible money, but it's actually quite tangible in how it's secured. And on that point of security, you mentioned the fact that there's this kind of S curve of how much energy is being used, which I think is really interesting because, am I right in thinking, in theory, the energy could just keep going up and up, right? Because it's more or less governed by the competitive nature of Bitcoin. I don't know if there's maybe some physical limits on the hardware that you're aware of, but primarily why is it going up and up is that people are competing to mine these blocks and they're putting more hardware, throwing more electricity at the problem. So while proof of work is also tied in with the security model of Bitcoin, why do you think it is that it's kind of tailed off into this S curve? Do you have any kind of intuition for that?
I think it's balanced out to the, let's say, the global value of Bitcoin as an asset class. So it's around 2%, something like that. It would be similar with gold. If gold suddenly became much more expensive, you would see a lot more gold mines springing up, and they would use a lot more energy as well. It's the same in Bitcoin. If it goes up in value, then there's an incentive for people to open up new operations. But where I think it's very useful to have this analogy between Bitcoin and gold. But one important difference is that Bitcoin mining is really clean technology in the sense of a Tesla is clean technology. It just uses electricity and gives you an output. There are no emissions caused in that process except for heat. And actually, there are a number of examples where that's very useful. So it is a clean technology, and it's now a useful tool in the energy transition, which maybe we can talk about later.
Yes, you say it's a clean technology. Now, what does that mean? In that, in itself, it doesn't add any like contribution to CO2 emissions. It's that it doesn't really default do anything. Like in terms of you can choose whatever input and then it can be renewable is what you're saying. Can you talk a little bit about how clean it is right now? Say what are the kind of the breakdowns of how people are typically, say, mining, what energy sources they're using, maybe why they would choose renewable energy sources, say, versus maybe something more cost effective like gas or coal still? I don't know if that's still the case or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Bitcoin mining, if your viewers are wondering, a mining machine, it just looks like an old desktop PC, essentially. It's about that big. Things, yeah. And the inputs are electricity, you plug it in, and the only output you get other than your Bitcoins is heat. So there are no greenhouse gas emissions at all. Mm-hmm. The only secondary emissions they might result in is the source of electricity. So if you are plugged into, let's say you have a direct wire to a hydroelectric dam, which is the most popular fuel source for Bitcoin mining.
Really?
Oh, wow, okay.
There's no emissions at all in that process. The current trends as well are important. So a great report came out from Cambridge University recently. It's only a few months old, explaining the global trends of Bitcoin mining. And it's exactly as you might think. It used to be dominated by greenhouse gas emitting processes, such as like coal fire, gas, etc. It used to be, I think, 70%, and that's dropped down to 20% in the last 5 years. Now, 41% of Bitcoins are mined using renewable energy. So it's much higher than the global average.
Okay.
And that's due to increase to 70% in 2030.
Oh, wow.
And there are kind of obvious drivers for that, which is renewable energy is the cheapest worldwide. So certain hubs have sprung up. This might help us understand this. In countries where they have large hydro dams, two of the main ones are Uruguay and Ethiopia. So Ethiopia have just built this huge dam. It's called the Grand Renaissance Dam.
Oh, nice.
And it's now operational. And it will produce twice as much electricity as the country will ever need. And there's a reason why they always overproduce the energy.
Yeah.
And it's actually a big challenge for them to find consumers who will buy that. So what they've done, which was very progressive, is they invited the Bitcoin mining community to set up operations next to the dam and are selling them their electricity. And it's some of the cheapest worldwide because it was just, otherwise it would just be, they'd have to do load shedding and just dissipate it.
What is load shedding? Because my immediate question when you say, okay, I have a dam, I'm just using this clean energy to mine Bitcoin, surely the counter argument that Greenpeace or whatever would make is, well, that energy could be used to, say, power a hospital or a school, and then that's pushing those people and those organizations to then maybe move towards more conventional, traditional means of energy production like gas, coal. So like the secondary effects of, say, someone setting up a mining operation on a dam, which is great, is someone else needing to, for the same energy consumption, use coal. What would you say to that kind of scenario?
I would say everyone wants to prioritize energy to schools, hospitals, and homes.
Political answer.
But I genuinely think all of us do. The miners do, the government does, and the people there. And at the moment, the grid in somewhere like Ethiopia is fragmented, so it's not all joined up. There are certainly hospitals that need electricity, but they're not connected to this dam, right? It's a big country that is huge infrastructure. So at the moment, there is excess energy, and that is being used by the Ethiopian government to generate revenue to accelerate the connectivity of their grid. A recent report said $200 million in so far this year, in the 6 months of 2025, have been generated by Ethiopia Electric Power.
Really? Wow.
Just from revenue from Bitcoin mining.
Just from that dam? Or across
just from Bitcoin mining on that dam.
Wow.
And that it's another way that Bitcoin mining is different from gold mining. So the operational expenditure in a gold mine is used to dig up the earth, and it's highly polluting, and it doesn't benefit everyone. In Bitcoin mining, a Bitcoin miner purchases energy off the local supplier. So the operational cost goes directly to the local community. So it's actually, if a Bitcoin miner moves into your area, it's a great thing. It's potentially a really great thing for the local community. Jobs, revenue to the state.
I guess a point on that, you talked about load and like load surges in, say, an electricity grid. Like one of the things I saw recently is like the UK is obviously pushing to hit our 2030 targets and net emissions zero, all this kind of stuff. and said, okay, well, we're doing lots of offshore, lots of natural, renewable energy sources, but the biggest problem is you get surges of that energy, so surges in wind, and when you've got a surge of energy, how do you store it? How do you use it productively? And the infrastructure, the grid itself, isn't made to handle surges. It's great for, say, standard kind of hospital running 24/7 at a medium output. But then when you have this surge of energy, what do you do with it? And storage and transport is really tricky for that surge time. I imagine something like plugging it into a Bitcoin miner potentially. I can't imagine the UK doing that. But imagine that scenario where when there is a surge, all of a sudden you ramp up Bitcoin mining production to push that. Is that something we're starting to see with these applications as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't imagine it happening in the UK, but there is really no reason why it shouldn't. So the curtailment of wind farms in the UK, so cutting off electricity production when there's too much of it, has lost potentially £1 billion pounds in revenue every year. That's due to increase eightfold by 2030.
Is that if they were mining Bitcoin with that energy?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So if you just look at Bitcoin as a tool to help energy producers, it's very unique. So the other options you might have, one would be trying to store it in a battery. Good luck with that with an offshore wind farm.
Yeah.
And the battery technology is still very challenging to store and transport. And there are other processes that mainly take electricity and generate something. One would be aluminium smelting, and more recently hydrogen extraction. But can you imagine that in sub-Saharan Africa? Like the infrastructure you need to make that work is a huge expense. So a much simpler, cleaner, modular way of doing that is with a Bitcoin mining pod, they would call them. Just come and set up shop. And there is no reason why we couldn't do that in the UK. We have a huge renewable energy sources here. That it's just political will, I think. And this is what I'd really love to change people's or challenge people's opinion on gently.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you'll challenge my opinion, because I think I've always held this same opinion that Bitcoin is fundamentally incredibly green technology. I've always thought of it as one of the first technologies that directly incentivizes the use of green energy for all those reasons that you're saying, right? Because in a sense, I think you could say it's really de-risking setting up green energy operations, because you have a way of making revenue off that surge electricity supply or whatever the energy will be. It also, I think it's very elegant in the way that it takes advantage of the actual properties of Bitcoin, in the sense that Bitcoin is distributed, and this is what allows you to co-locate the Bitcoin mining with these facilities, right? In theory, because you can just go where the energy is, where the energy excess is, because you can, the way you construct, we don't want to get too technical into the kind of bits and bytes, but the way you construct blocks and things means that you don't actually necessarily even have to have the mining operations right on site. If they, it could be a little bit further away, or you can kind of split things up between places. But because it's this kind of digital form of money as well that is distributed, that means you can kind of go where these energy sources are that might be a little bit more kind of remote in that sense as well.
Oh yeah, you could put them in the middle of Siberia or something like that. It's very simple to co-locate, and when it's no longer viable, you pack up and go somewhere else, and they can be turned on and off in an instant. So if you have 1 hour a day where you're generating excess energy, you stick it on for that amount of time.
On this like grid stuff, I think this is the most interesting development for me. I saw a story about Texas, and they did this kind of applied this system to their grid electricity, right? And one of the outcomes of this was they avoided grid stress and blackouts. Can you talk a little bit about that story as well? I think that's particularly interesting of how it applies in the Western world as well.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so it's not just about developing nations. Texas is a great example, which even it caught me by surprise. So what happened in Texas is they had a policy of trying to deregulate their energy market, because they had quite high energy costs, and they did have issues with blackouts and things like that. And as a result, a lot of Bitcoin miners moved in, and now it has one of the largest mining communities there, and also the lowest energy costs and the most resilient grids. So that's counterintuitive. And why is that? So firstly, it's the the Bitcoin mining financing renewable expansion in Texas, and also the Texas government aren't stupid. They say, okay, if you're going to come in here and use our energy, well, we'll let you do it as long as we have a contract that says if there is a moment of crisis, like there's a storm or something, we're going to divert that energy to the local community. And of course, the Bitcoin miners agreed with that. That's good for everyone. So yeah, they have these disaster relief policies as well. So it's like a kind of, you have these sites that are reliably consuming a large amount of energy that can be channeled to domestic use in the case of emergency. So for them, it's a way of stabilizing their grid.
Today's episode is sponsored by the VeChain Foundation.
Now, we often talk about how emerging technologies like blockchain have the potential to revolutionize sustainability, and VeChain is at the forefront of this green movement with initiatives like VBetterDAO. Let's take a closer look.
Imagine tracking small actions like recycling at low cost, making them valuable assets. These verified records build a massive collective impact, benefiting people through their own actions. Sound a bit complex, but VeChain made it fun. Explore our apps at vbetter.com.
VeChain's goal is to power a new era of sustainable solutions. So if you've got an app idea or just want to earn rewards for small, sustainable actions every day, go check out vbetterdao.com to find out more. And now, back to the show.
So I'm curious as to, we've covered the fact that Bitcoin should, in theory and in practice, is becoming more and more a green technology. Mm-hmm. How do I know as a kind of end consumer of the Bitcoin network that any given block has been mined by renewable energy, for example? Is there any way to do that?
Do people care about having Bitcoins that are renewably mined? Is that something, especially when we think about we're at all-time highs now, everyone's talking about institutional adoption. Is it something that retail users and obviously institutions care about, knowing where and how their Bitcoin was mined?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's there are analogies in other industries that tell us end consumers do care about the provenance of the materials that go into their consumables. For example, diamonds. Now I think Pandora will only source certified ethically produced diamonds. Mm-hmm. And also in the gold industry, there's an organization called Fairmined Gold who certify ethical and sustainable gold mines, and their gold trades at a premium on the open market. So there's a consumer demand. There's also a question for institutions, particularly institutional funds like the kind of BlackRocks of the world, but also new entrants to the market like corporate treasuries who often have very ingrained values of corporate responsibility, and at the moment that can be at odds with purchasing an asset that does use a lot of electricity to produce a Bitcoin. So the question is, what do you do about that? And there are a couple of solutions on the market at the moment. One would be to try and offset that, so you can estimate how much greenhouse gas emissions are used to produce a Bitcoin, and you can try and purchase a carbon credit to offset that. But if you've ever looked at the carbon credit market, it's the real Wild West, and there's huge degree of varying quality of those. Another would be to go directly to the source of those Bitcoins to say, okay, well, here's a miner based in Finland. Can I buy their coins directly? And that's where Bitroots comes in to help people do that.
Okay, so actually on that stat around do people care about ethically sourced assets, the ESG asset market right now is 30 trillion globally. So there obviously is an appetite for ethically sourced commodities. And I think you're touching on something that is going to be of a significant importance in the future. So you said there are things out there right now. Mm-hmm. What is Bitroots? What is the company that's why you're here? What is the USP? How do you differentiate? What are you doing different to the competitors that are doing this now?
Mm-hmm. Well, we're on a mission to allow users of Bitcoin to purchase clean coins, so coins produced with zero emissions, directly from certified miners. So what we do is we visit mining sites that are using renewable energy. We give them an audit and a certificate valid for 1 year. And then when they produce their Bitcoins, when they mine a new block, those will inherit that certificate. And as they're traded on the ledger, we can track those as well. So we also have an API if you want to integrate this with if you're a wallet or an exchange and offer this to your customers. We want to help that as well. So we're trying to really make the provenance of a Bitcoin transparent, to give people that option of not just buying a Bitcoin and then offsetting the emissions, but to not cause any emissions in the first place. So I don't want people just to not be guilty about buying a Bitcoin, but I want them to be proud of it. You know, I want to buy Bitcoin that I knew came from a miner in Ethiopia that was financing renewable energy and grid expansion. I'd be really, really proud to own those Bitcoins, and that's what I'm trying to do at Bitroots, is allow people to do that.
Yeah, and this is really interesting, this idea of almost certifying a miner in some regard. Like in this case, obviously, it's ESG credentials and how it's sourced to Bitcoin. To me, this is something that is semi-unique, at least to Bitcoin again, right? Because of the proof of work, because it's easy to identify who these miners actually are. If you tried to do this in the kind of digital accounting system of Ethereum, for example, it'd be more difficult to do this potentially. So what does that process actually look like in terms of, maybe you could walk us through the whole the flow and steps. How do I become certified as a miner, and how do I as an end user then see that in reality? Where do I see that certification?
Yeah, so if you're a miner, it's very similar to the Fairmind in gold certification standards. So you volunteer to be certified, so you contact us. We'll do a site inspection. It's very important that you actually do a physical inspection, check out the place, check there are the machines you're expecting, the energy source you're expecting, and then issue a certificate. And the good thing about Bitcoin is it's so transparent that you can do a continual passive audit of this miner. So I can look at, let's say they have 10,000 machines of a certain model. I can estimate with a high degree of accuracy how many Bitcoin I would expect them to produce each year. And I can continually monitor that. If they wanted, we could even go down to the individual machine, because each machine produces something called a share. So you know exactly how many machines are at work at any time. So you can achieve this kind of gold standard of continual passive audit of a Bitcoin miner. Yeah.
And then what about the energy source as well? Is it quite, I imagine it's quite, my immediate question was, could they flip from hydro to gas like overnight? Same machine, but different input. But I imagine that's quite tricky to do. I imagine both are big operations, especially when you're talking at miners of like BTC scale, that they wouldn't be able to just move from coal to hydro in the same facility, right?
Yeah, and it's almost always the case that renewables will be cheaper. And energy, the source of energy certification is actually quite a well-established industry. So these things called renewable energy certificates in the US, for example, that you will buy from the energy supplier, and it's quite easy to. Actually checking the energy composition is the easy part of that whole process.
And what's been like the miners' responses? Like, I have no idea what the profile is of a miner. I don't know what they look like. The people was thinking their enterprises maybe getting more regulated with institutional adoption. Like, when you have these conversations, what is the response to this kind of thing? How has it gone?
Yeah, well, I think they aren't aware that this is possible. Like a lot of miners, I find it hard to believe, they just sell their coins on the open market.
Yeah.
They don't realize there is people will pay more for clean coins directly from miners. One of the drivers is the renewable energy composition, and the other is simply a clean coin history. So they know that it hasn't been, proceeds of crime or anything like that. And I know miners who are selling their coins for 5% more on the open market. I'm trying to make that systematic. Oh, wow. Yeah, so to really educate these miners that they have, if you're a miner with renewable energy, you have a premium product right there, and you should be monetizing that. Then from a user's perspective, so we're a B2B company, so we have our API that will be integrated with, let's say, an exchange. So maybe you're a Coinbase or something like that. They can then offer their users a certified Bitcoin. So you'd see it on the app with the little tag, and if you want, you can click on that tag and you can go to our website and verify the certificate that comes with each coin. So ultimately, when you buy your coin, it will come with a certificate that you can verify yourself.
Yeah, that's very, very cool. I think that was going to be my next question, was this whole idea of the history and the tracing as well, because I'm kind of imagining there may be other applications for that and other applications for your approach, but not even in just the kind of renewable kind of green energy side of things, but if you want to certify a miner for a different purpose, right, and you want to, I don't know, I'm not talking KYC or anything, but I'm talking like there might be things for jurisdictional purposes that you might want to say, well, I've sourced my Bitcoin from a certain entity. Have you thought about that kind of, those other applications for this approach you've got? Yeah,
so there are many attributes of a miner that might be interesting to you. One might be the energy composition, the other might be the location. So you're a miner in the USA, for example. Another might be, let's say, community engagement. So a lot of miners actually have philanthropic projects going on in their local community. And others might be the investor. Maybe you want to mine some Bitcoin yourself, and then now you can have a certificate saying, yeah, those were mined by me, produced here. And also they might just want to know where it's going. So instead of just selling it on the open market, I might want to know, well, the renewable energy Bitcoin I've used have gone to this particular corporate treasury who we have a strong partnership with, and you can suddenly start seeing where your coins are going and what they're used for. So yeah, it's I like to think of it like a banknote, like a dollar bill. On that bill you have some interesting information, not just that it's $1, but you have the particular printing station that it was printed in. You even have the sheet number, you have the serial number. And on a Bitcoin, we don't quite have all of those things. We have something analogous to a serial number for sure and the amount, but we can also give it a kind of birth certificate as well. And that's, this is off-chain information. It's just more information attached to a Bitcoin. And I'd like people to choose how they want to use that or not.
I think you're using one of the fundamental properties of Bitcoin, the transparency, the fact it's an open ledger, and actually putting useful characteristics in there that I don't think are utilized properly right now, but can be utilized for things like this. Especially, Trump introduced this legislation recently that enabled US citizens to use their 401ks, their retirement funds, to start investing in crypto. And when you think of bigger institutions, sovereign wealth funds that obviously have high standards for investment moving into Bitcoin, they're like the perfect target for this type of thing. They actually have to care about these things because there's legislation that says they have to invest in certain levels of ESG assets, right, and commodities. What is the future of Bitcoin, do you think? Not just from, say, your perspective, but where do you see this space going in the next 5 years?
Well, I would say at a very high level, we're seeing the second great transformation caused by Bitcoin. The first was in the financial markets, and it's now happening in the energy market. It's now becoming a very, very serious tool in the transition to renewable energy, and we're right at the ground floor of that, really. So there's a huge opportunity to think about how we incorporate that in nation level energy policy. And there are certain countries, we've mentioned a few already. Another really interesting one is Bhutan, this tiny little country in Asia, who are mining Bitcoin at a national level. And I think per capita, they are the highest Bitcoin holders in any country in the world. And it's done a huge amount to stabilize their economy. So yeah, we're seeing certain kind of interesting case studies where it's really being used as a tool to improve the environment and the lives of certain countries.
I think that's something that really excites me. When we arranged this, I thought it'd be very much about how do I improve mining? It's all about mining, right? How to improve Bitcoin transparency for retail and institutional adoption. But I think what the flip side is that you're talking about is energy is going to be one of the most important things going forward, especially with not just with the crypto race, but also with the AI race specifically. So how do we push the move to renewable energy, because there's going to be so much more in terms of demands on energy sources. And the idea of having a kind of transition period where we have renewable energy, we have wind farms, we have hydro dams, but we don't have the best ways of storing that energy when there's peak demand or moving it around, and still being able to monetize that in the interim while those technologies are constantly being improved. I think it's really exciting. It de-risks a lot of, say, the biggest issues in setting up a wind farm right now, because you can generate money when there is this peak surge and you can't necessarily put it into the grid. Like you say, these wind farms, solar panels are being turned off because there's nothing they can do with that energy. I think that is a really exciting outcome that I hadn't thought about before.
Yeah, it's a couple of things there. It's absolutely correct. And the other technology you might think about as well is AI training and inference, because this obviously uses a lot of energy as well, and it's something we're starting to use day in, day out. But they do have quite different profiles. So an AI data center typically needs quite a high bandwidth internet connection going in and out or something like that. But whereas Bitcoin mining can really be pushed out right to the edge. And we're talking about reducing the waste of excess electricity on a wind farm, something like that. That's great. But there are also ways, I kid you not, where it's being used to reduce the carbon in the atmosphere. And a good example is stranded gas. So there are a lot of these big projects that gases just flares out of them, and there's no incentive to stop that. So we need to get the gas out, release it in a load of methane into the atmosphere. And now this is no longer theory. This is happening quite a lot, that their Bitcoin mining operations are moving in, saying, okay, well, let's turn that stranded gas into electricity. It still does release emissions, but far less, and it's profitable. So in that case, it's not only neutral for the environment, but it is reducing greenhouse gas emissions by utilizing that stranded gas.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I had no idea that was the case, because obviously we've had, you mentioned Bhutan, and other use cases. Obviously another one would be El Salvador, famously co-locating mining, I believe, with geothermal energy and the
volcano, right?
Yeah, the volcanoes. I have no idea. I've kind of ignored what's happening in El Salvador for a few years, but that was one of the high profile ones. We were looking to the future there. There's one question I would have is, just that kind of curiosity. How does this whole model interact with, I guess, the elephant in the room, that Bitcoin mining won't always go on in the way that it currently is, right? So we know that when we think of Bitcoin mining, we're kind of thinking about the analogy with gold generating or sourcing new Bitcoins. One day that won't be happening anymore, right? There'll be 21 million Bitcoins available. How does this model look to you in the future once the entire Bitcoin supply has been issued? And because I can imagine, on the one hand, maybe something changes, but on the other hand, there may be even more demand for this kind of certified energy, right? Because we're using it, I guess, at a different analogy at that point. We're not producing new Bitcoin, we're kind of recycling it in a way, which, I'm just curious to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so it's a great point worth remembering that 95% of all Bitcoins have already been issued. Yeah. But that last 5% is still hugely valuable because the price has gone up so much. So as an example, every year there's $16 billion worth of new Bitcoins produced. At the moment, there's 3.125 Bitcoins, new Bitcoins produced per block. That will reduce by half in next halving, which is in 28. But also, we're at an all-time high in Bitcoin price. So assuming the price doubles by then, you're neutral loss of income for the Bitcoin miners. And even when all of those Bitcoins are issued, we'll still have Bitcoins recycled through the miners in transaction fees. And it's entirely fair to say that those should be certified renewable as well, because they've come through the system.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a nice moment to end on, potentially, because that, for me, completes the story of Bitcoin as a clean technology. It's moving from mining to recycling in the future. So,
yes.
Yeah, I like that as a narrative. Owen, it's been fantastic to have you on. We've been wanting to talk to you for a long time. Can we ask, where should people go to find out more about what you're doing at Bitroots, or to reach out? Where's the best place to find you?
Oh, yeah, please reach out at our website, so bitroots.io. If you're interested in being one of the first to get your hands on some certified clean Bitcoin, you can sign up to our waitlist. Our product's due to be released in the middle of September next month. And if you are a renewable miner, get in contact with us and we can certify you. We'd love to hear any interest. You can follow us on Twitter as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Owen. It's been a huge pleasure. We hope this won't be the last time you're on the podcast. Best of luck for the future of Bitroots. And to everyone listening at home, thank you for listening, and you can join us next time to untangle a little more Web3.